Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about a video Krystal and Saagar did where they said that Ukraine purposefully killed civilians. This is obviously not true. And we're going to be talking about some of the points they made throughout this video. And yeah, let's get to it.
Lots going on in Ukraine. This was a shocking development that happened just yesterday. Let's go ahead and play some of this video. This was released from the beach in Crimea. These are American missiles launched by Ukrainian military at a civilian beach in Crimea that, according to the Russians, killed women and children. Now, we'll see. The official death toll and all of that has not yet been released. However, we do basically have confirmation from the Russian and the Ukrainian side that such a strike did happen, which we will get to.
Yes, a strike did happen, and civilians were killed. But it wasn't like Ukraine purposefully attacked the beach to kill civilians. That did not happen. Now, throughout this entire video, they're going to act like that was the case, but it is not. We see from a Reuters article where it says, a U.S. official later said that Ukraine was not targeting civilians. It seemed that the Russians were able to intercept a missile that was targeting a missile launcher, and it exploded, and shrapnel was raining down on the beach, and that's where the civilian death occurred. So Ukraine did not target this beach just to kill civilians.
Immediately invited strong condemnation from President Putin. Let's put this up there. He says that Russia, quote, knows perfectly well who was behind the Ukrainian attack on Crimea, and it was not Ukraine, then threatening retaliation against NATO assets all across Ukraine that are there to, quote unquote, training and equipping. Now, one of the ways that you're able to confirm that such a strike happened is that the Ukrainians are bragging about it. Let's put this up there, and let's really spend some time on this. So this is from an head of office of an advisor to the office of President Zelensky. Here's what he says, and he says it in English, so let's be clear about who this is targeted to. There are not and cannot be any beaches, tourist zones, and other fictitious sites of peaceful life in Crimea. Crimea is definitively a foreign territory occupied by Russia, where there are hostilities and a full-scale war. The very war that Russia has unleashed for genocidal and invasive purposes only. Crimea is also a large military camp and warehouse with hundreds of direct military targets which the Russians are cynically trying to hide and cover up with their own civilians, which in turn are considered to be civilian occupiers. Where have I heard such rhetoric before there, Krystal? And this is the thing, is everyone, all of the Ukraine supporters will be like, what, you want them to fight fairly? And it's like, well, okay, fairly means you're using your own weapons. You're using our weapons now, and you're using it, at least in this case, to openly target quote-unquote civilians on a beach. Why should we have any confidence, by the way, in your...
They weren't. You see how he says as though they killed civilians on purpose? No, they did not.
Targeting ability, if this is what you're using it for, we're the ones who are responsible for this. We're paying for it, we're funding it, we're in some cases directing it and telling them where all of the targets are. The Pentagon, I mean, one of the things that came through in the Discord leaks was the extent to which the Pentagon is basically carrying out and running all Ukrainian ops right here out of Northern Virginia and out of European Command in Germany. So what we see clearly here is that we are allowing this to happen. We are allowing this to spiral. The Pentagon, too, let's put this up there. Just look at their own rhetoric after they were asked. They say Ukraine may fire into U.S.-provided missiles into Russia wherever it is, quote, coming under attack. And then here it gets even dicier because this is Crimea. Now, look, I'm not saying it's just that Russia, is occupied and has annexed Crimea. I do know that most of the people there consider themselves Russian. So you take that for what it is. I'm not going to...
Why would he mention that? That seems a little weird that he would, say this Russia propaganda and then just say, oh, well, I'm not saying, one way or the other what you should think, if that is right or wrong. I'm just going to mention it. Why are you mentioning it? And then you're trying to, act like you're not taking a position. Well, it kind of does seem like you're taking a position if you're going to say that and then just pretend like, oh, I'm just bringing it up just to bring it up.
Take a side either way. I am going to say that if you're going to bomb, civilian beaches and then claim that it's totally okay with our weapons, which will probably have some say about that. And the crazy...
Well, they didn't purposefully bomb a beach to kill civilians. We just saw the article. It's not what happened.
Thing is that our say is, yeah, that's absolutely and totally fine.
I mean, that statement is so disturbing and perplexing on so many levels. First of all, he says Crimea is definitely a foreign territory occupied by Russia, and therefore, the civilians are quote-unquote civilian occupiers and fair game. I thought you also...
They're not fair game. They weren't targeted.
Consider Crimea to be part of Ukraine.
Well, yeah, that's right.
You consider these to be your people.
It's fake.
He said in the tweet that Russia was bringing in Russians and using them, as we could see right here, trying to hide and cover up with their own civilians. He's not saying that the people that were in Crimea are not Ukrainian. He's talking about the people that they put there. Number one. And number two, yes, most people right now that are there are Russian. But it's because Russia invaded Crimea in 2014. So, yeah, it's not surprising that there are Russians there right now.
Sites of peaceful life.
And let's go back. Where were we? It's like around, I think, here. Something like this.
Consider these to be like, you know, your people are...
It's fake. Yeah.
I mean, and obviously, like, this is the same logic that allows targeting of civilians that not only Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu and co use when they say, hey, we need to talk more about this concept of innocent civilians, or when Herzog says, oh, there are no uninvolved civilians. It's their logic. It's the logic of Osama bin Laden. It's the logic of basically, you know, every evil bad guy in history who wants an excuse to murder civilians.
What a stupid thing to say. Is she really equating what Ukraine is doing by defending themselves, which is not purposefully killing civilians, to people who purposefully kill civilians? I mean, just so ridiculous. It's just so stupid.
And these are our supposed, you know, great humanitarians on the side of the good, you know, the goodness and the light, the Ukrainians.
Again, what are you trying to say? What, they're not the good guys in this conflict? That if between Russia and Ukraine, oh, they're both bad. Is that what she's really trying to say? That the people that got invaded and are trying to get taken over and them defending themselves, well, they're the bad guys too. It's so fucking dumb.
With our weapons. So there's the logical and the moral piece of this is outrageous. And then I'm just looking, what are we playing at here? Like, these things have potential consequences that are massive, that we seem to continue to sleepwalk into. And I see no media discussion, debate. I see no dissent whatsoever from mainstream channels about this extraordinarily dangerous policy, which is an outrageous escalation, which could have...
They didn't purposefully kill civilians. So, where's this escalation coming from? Russia is using this as a propaganda point to be able to say, hey, look, they're killing civilians. The U.S., Ukraine did it, but the U.S. is directing them. So it was really the U.S. who did it. Yes, this is how they propagandize so that they could try to build legitimacy to be able to escalate and do more. And you're feeding into that. You're giving it to them. That's exactly what they want.
Have dramatic consequences, right? We don't know where this is all going to end up. We just act like this is nothing. If the Biden administration announced this policy from the very beginning of like, yeah, sure, have our weapons and bomb Russia or bomb civilians on the beach in Crimea.
They did not.
There would have been at least some like, whoa, what are we doing here? But because they've done like a frog in the boiling pot of water and just continually turn up the temp and continue to ship more and more weapons. Oh, we'll do the long range missiles, it turns out. All of those supposed red lines that were set at the beginning, those are all gone now. But since it was done gradually, everyone just accepts it. And it makes me feel like I'm crazy watching this unfold.
Well, you should be and feel crazy because what do we hear every single time that the Russians, by the way, terribly hit infrastructure and kill civilians? Oh my God, these Russian genocidal invaders are killing power station employees. Yeah, it's bad. It's terrible.
Right.
A missile went off and hit a park in the middle of Ukraine and a child was killed. Awful, right? And that's part of the moral high ground which they play into, and why a lot of Americans still have a lot of sympathy for them. But now you're doing the exact same thing. Yeah. You're terrorizing civilians in Crimea, allegedly, by the way, your own citizens. Or are they not? Are they citizen occupiers? What are we talking about here?
Right.
Again, shows the farce of that whole situation.
It's not a farce. He never claimed that the Crimea is not their civilians. That tweet never said that. So I don't know why he's bringing that up again, trying to act like, oh, it's just mixed. Like they keep saying one day that it's the Crimea, you know, it's Russians and it's not their civilians there. It's not their people. And then another day they are saying it. When do you ever hear there ever being a question about if Crimea is a part of Ukraine? That the people that live there are Ukrainian or not? When do you ever hear that from Ukrainians or from anybody? It doesn't exist, so I don't know what he's talking about here.
And then, not to mention, all of those border towns, which they have used drones and now our weapons to target into, they are, free. It's like a free fire zone. You think they're doing a good job in terms of their targeting? I go on Telegram every day and watch the videos of the fallout from these things. There's civilians who are killed all the time. Now we're basically just doing what they are doing. So then, what are the Russians going to do? The people with superior manpower, nuclear weapons, they're just going to take even more of the gloves off. And they're like, okay, forget it. We're just going to go all out. Who is going to bear the brunt ultimately?
So what is he suggesting or saying here? That Ukraine should just what? Stop defending themselves or what? That we should just let Russia take over Ukraine? Is that what he's trying to say? Like, just they should stop defending themselves. Like, what are we doing here?
Actual people who are caught in the middle, the actual civilians, allegedly who the Ukrainians are trying to liberate and save, except not really, because now they're literally going to kill them. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is a joke. It makes everything much more dangerous for us. Already, Putin saying that he is going to target NATO assets. You know, the rhetoric right now coming out of Russia is terrifying. Everyone's like, oh, they've been saying it for 2 years. Only needs to go bad once. At the meantime,
yeah. And you're feeding into their propaganda so that they could feel justified and you know, say to the world, look at what the U.S. is doing. Look at what Ukraine is doing. They're attacking us. The U.S. by proxy is attacking us. So it's really the U.S. and that's why we must do what we need to do. And by you feeding into that propaganda, by saying Ukraine is purposefully targeting civilians just to kill civilians, yes, you're feeding into that. Like I said before.
By the way, I couldn't help but flag this one. Jake Sullivan and the White House bragging. Let's put this up there. The U.S. will fund the printing of more than 3 million textbooks, Krystal, for Ukrainian students to use in the coming school year after Russia escalated its attacks on Ukrainian printing facilities, which were used to print Ukrainian propaganda. Russia struck that largest printing house in Kharkiv just last month. Jake Sullivan puts this out, basically with no read of the U.S. domestic context, and is bragging about how this is an effort to prop up Ukrainian civil society and how this demonstrates U.S. will and resolve in backing Ukraine. We're paying their janitors, we're printing their textbooks. And look, I agree it can be trite sometimes of we're spending all this money over there and we're spending all this money over here, or not spending any money over here. But in this case, it's actually true. Where I grew up, Texas, College Station ISD, I remember my textbooks were falling apart. I asked, apparently most people, they still have that experience in school. These kids are getting brand new textbooks on behalf of the U.S. taxpayer. What's happening here? If you're having trouble, your kids or whatever, you're paying tons of money in property tax, etc., and you're watching 3 million Ukrainian kids get free books from the U.S. taxpayer. How do you feel about that? It pisses me off. I think it should.
Yeah. I think there is a real sense of okay, you guys legit are more committed to the populations of Ukraine and
Israel
than we're here, and it's just hard to disagree.
True.
It's really hard to disagree.
It's hard to disagree. Yeah, I feel like the U.S. could do both. I feel like the U.S. could help out Ukraine with stuff like this, and also fix the issues that that he brought up here in the United States. We can do both. And another thing, you want to improve schooling? Be involved. Be involved in local elections, vote. Be involved in other ways locally to be able to improve the system that exists in your community. In this instance, we're talking about schooling, so that you can have, new textbooks and other such things that improve the quality of education. Yes, be involved. That's how you do it. And you can do that, and the federal government could also go and help Ukraine too. Those two things can coexist.
When you see where the money goes, when you see where the focus and attention goes, when you see where the John Kirby up there getting into tears about what's going on in Ukraine. When's the last time you saw a U.S. official in tears about something that was happening to someone here?
Literally.
Or where they called an emergency session of Congress to make sure we pass funding to make sure people here have health insurance or childcare or any number of other things that Americans housing
what about
could really help with. Right?
People just died last week of fentanyl. It's insane. I was just looking at some of the stories coming out of Los Angeles and San Francisco. This is horrific stuff right here in the USA. They don't care.
And then just to
we could do multiple things.
Take it back to the APAC block and what we were just talking about there. Even the money that's being spent and the focus and attention in elections is on, he has wrong think on our policy vis-a-vis a foreign nation, as if that's just so outrageously out of the bounds of discussion and conversation in American politics. It really is wild. It really is priorities turned upside down. And this is sort of, I think this is a very bipartisan and correct sense of the priorities of Washington. And then even beyond that, it's just, we're playing such a dangerous game. We're playing such a dangerous game and just hoping we can continue the provocations, and Putin's just going to continue to bluff and never actually make good on the threats. And that's quite a bet to take. And for what? For what? What is the plan here? Where is this going? No one can tell you, because there is no plan. The plan is just to muddle through, hope it stays the same.
No, the plan is to help Ukraine defend themselves. That's the plan, as we should do. So again, what is she saying also? The plan is to just let them be and let them deal with it by themselves. And then when they get taken over, and then, Russia's probably going to want to do that to another country. No, we should help Ukraine to prevent that. First off, morally we should. But second of all, even for just U.S. interest and interest of our allies, we should help them. Even if you don't care, like, oh, whatever, let them defend themselves on their own, and we don't have to help them from Russia trying to take over their country. Even if you don't care personally about that, even for U.S. interest, there is plenty there to where you would want to help them also. Now, I think we should help them morally and for U.S. interest, because it's the right thing to do. We should help them, but
hope Joe Biden can get himself reelected and then figure it out on the other side. The last thing I'll say here is, with regards to the strike on civilians in Crimea and describing them as quote unquote civilian occupiers, I do think that Israel, I don't think they put out this statement if Israel hadn't, just gotten away with bombing civilians over the course of 9 months and justifying it, and the U.S. press covering for it, and the Biden administration obviously covering for it and continuing to ship those weapons, et cetera. Because how can anyone in the Biden administration say, like, oh, you can't use this rhetoric and this is wrong, et cetera, when, okay, well, what about your good buddies over here in Israel? So that's the way that, when these things get justified, it doesn't stay localized in Gaza. Right? Where we see that with the potential expansion of the war into Lebanon, too. The bombing, targeting civilian infrastructure, the massive death of civilians, the starving of civilians, all these things have been normalized now. And other leaders around the world are paying attention. We have zero moral high ground to stand on now and lecture anyone about humanitarianism, democracy, human rights, or any of the rest.
But Krystal always lectures and talks about how, people don't care about Palestinian lives. Right? How many times have you heard her say that? But how often do you hear her talk about Ukrainian civilian death and Ukrainian lives? Just recently, you had a children's hospital get hit in a bombing campaign that happened, like 5 days ago or something. Did she do a video on that? Did she talk about that? No, she didn't. Like I said, she says Palestinian lives matter, but doesn't seem like Ukrainian lives matter as much to her.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to come back and bite us, and it already has. So, hey, if you like...
So, yeah, that's pretty much the video. Just wanted to point out all of the stupid points and misinformation they did in this video. And, yeah, that's it.